is start today's discussion with these great panelists. And what I want to do is set the framework for everybody. So when we're talking about cloud computing, and when we're talking about cloud, what do we mean, right? What is it exactly it means? So I want to start with a quote from Judy Garland, an American actress and singer. She said, "Behind every cloud is another cloud." Right? So we add some art to this whole concept. But clouds came kind of in existence relatively very fast. I was struck when they said, "Oh, there's cloud computing." I'm like, wow, they put servers on the cloud? Right? That was my initial reaction to this. But it turns out it's more than that. So what is cloud computing, really? What is the question about cloud computing? But to answer this question, right, I want to also bring in an artist, right, Kazimir Malevich, a Russian artist as well. And I want to tie cloud computing, the concept of cloud computing, to art. You know, it's not the first time that we tie art to computing or technology. Steve Jobs did one heck of a job doing this, right? So let's just connect art to computing and to technology. And Malevich kind of started this whole trend of art called the suprematists. And what it is really an additional element. He added an additional element to art as a quality of a new visual environment, bringing about change in perception. The suprematis is associated with a series of aerial views, rendering the familiar landscape into abstraction. So he took something that is so basic that everybody sees, oh, well, I know what it is, but he took an aerial view of it, and he changed our perceptions. So reflect a little bit. Reflect on what cloud computing has done to the concept of computing itself, to technology itself. It has taken something that we think of as nuts and bolts, things that are grounded or plugged into the wall, that emit heat, that are just so clunky, and now we're thinking about clouds, about something so abstract. So cloud computing, in my way of definition, is a mechanism for delivering scalable business services that execute on a decentralized computing fabric composed of commodity software and hardware. Scalable business seems like a very powerful word, right? Taking something so concrete and scaling it up using this idea of cloud computing. So why? Why are you here? Why are we doing cloud computing? Why are we bringing these experts from Washington, D.C. and around the world with so many years of knowledge and wisdom for them to talk to us about cloud computing? Why is it that important? Right? Why is it such a trendy word right now? Well, it's very simple. It offers us something that a lot of other things offer us. It's bigger, better, faster, and cheaper. It changes the rules of the game. It creates creative destruction. Right? And that is why we're talking about cloud computing. Well, how much impact is cloud computing? Does it have? Well, here's the impact that it can potentially have. There are 5.3 million mobile subscribers worldwide. We reached about 7 billion people. 5.3 of them are mobile subscribers. Right? And if the graph, we can share the graph a little bit later on, it gives you by region and country who are they subscribing to. Some download apps, some is it for entertainment, but some of it is vital for their livelihood. It's a way of communication. Mobile apps inflection point. 25 billion apps downloaded in 2011. 25 billion apps were downloaded in 2011. That is a 300% jump from 2010, when 6 billion were downloaded. So only in 1 year, we saw a 300% jump in downloadable apps. And this trend is just going to keep it exponentially increasing. So if that's the case, and that's what we see the trends are happening, and this is what we'll be discussing today with our panelists, right? What is the mobile developers' priorities for 2011? Well, it goes back to concrete business terms, something that we do here in the business school, something that we teach, we educate, and you continuously see in the marketplace for those companies that are successful and those ones that fade away because they don't really understand the new business rules. It is about reaching customers. It is about engaging the customers. It is about loyalty. And finally, it's about monetization. Where's the money? But you have to do all 4 components of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. to me, it's always a pleasure to be in a university atmosphere. As Professor Tabou said, I was a professor for a number of years at the American University of Beirut. And I have to say, it's despite the fact that it was civil war there, it was one of the most memorable experiences that I've had. It makes you think, it makes you feel young constantly, although I was quite young then. But it is really a very rewarding profession. Having said that, let me just clarify a little bit. The bio that he presented is a little bit old. Yes, I was the joint global director for the World Bank Group of what we call the ICT sector, meaning telecom and IT. I'll talk about it a little for 10 years. And I've more or less established most of the practice sets right now there. But for the last year and a half, I've assumed a different position, which is a global head of IFC Climate Business Group. So I shifted to climate change and clean tech. So still doing venture capital, but not in IT and clean tech. And recently I announced I'm also leaving IFC. So now, as of last week, I don't have a position. So, just to put things on the record. I just because of the nature, I never come and prepare to sessions like this, so let me be very frank, because then depending on who the panelists and when is my turn to speak. Now, given that I'm in the presence of very successful entrepreneurs, I'm going to try to give you a little bit the global macro perspective, so looking at it from the top. I'm going to avoid initially cloud computing, and then save my views and specific comments relating to venture capital and investing to the discussion session. I represent here in the panel, if I may say so, the supply side, which is the investment side. I'm not myself an entrepreneur, but I had the pleasure of working with so many of them, starting with very basic grassroots entrepreneurship, a program that we built up from scratch, through InfoDev, incubation program in developing countries, and now it has about 450 incubators network in about 110 countries, so it's probably the largest incubators network. This started in about 2001. We got funding from the Japanese government when ICT was at that time the topic. And then, incubation was a very sexy theme here in the US and faded away, except the way we did the incubation in developing countries was very, very different. It was not the high-end technology. It wasn't the, sharing the upside, etc. It was very basic kind of, innovation, grassroots innovation, just creating the environment to enable people, common people, particularly this disenfranchised class, to develop their own ideas. So we worked on that, and to our pleasant surprise, it turned out to be by far more successful than we anticipated in terms of the success rate, the graduation rate, etc. We also did venture capital, in IT. We've done way, way ahead of others. Mobile, I was considered to be, while you guys, think that it's so evident to you because you were born almost with it. Believe it or not, when I started my career and I was an investment officer, and was pushing for cellular or investment in cellular companies in developing countries for places, people thought that I was crazy and went complain to my manager. And even it took us very hard time to convince our board because, the comment was, why are we investing in the rich? It's against our mandate. Now, in the process, I've seen people become billionaires, not millionaires, and we were very, instrumental in helping them. The likes of Mo Brahim in Africa, or Dennis O'Brien in Caribbean, or Sunil Mittal Bharti in India, and many others. And we've made bets on them, and we took very high risk. Now, my ex-wife thinks I'm crazy because I did it for the others and we didn't do it for myself. But the interesting thing is that the impact that they've had on developing country was huge, as you know. And the argument right now, it's probably one of the best things that happened to the poor rather than to the rich. And the other interesting aspect, because we ventured into it and took risk, And our first investment of all places was in DRC, former Zaire. You know, this is where we started, Africa. So 20 years ago, you know, it was 89, 90. So over 20 years ago, investing in cellular, you know, in former Zaire, you know, that wasn't evident. But because we made the non-evident investments, I think we've made more money in telecom and IT than historically IFC will ever make money. Not that we've made money. So our returns beat any other, you know, fund, private equity or venture capital fund in the US by far. I mean, our returns on telecom should be in the 40% compounded over 15 years, easy. So I mean, in IT we've had different, you know, situation. You know, we went through the burst, we went through the bust. Fortunately, we avoided making crazy investments. And many times I was asked to shut down the venture capital, like I was asked to shut down InfoDev, and I refused in both instances. Until right now, you know, we knew the business, how to do venture capital. We just had one investment in Russia, turned out to be the Google, and our return will be over 100x. You know, so 2 investments as I leave, total cost $21 million. IFC will make about $1 to $1.1 billion in gain. So, you know, it did a lot of good, but also it wasn't really a dumb investment. So, I mean, these are one of these historical moments, you know, which I don't think will be repeated that easily, and I'll comment on it, where you make lots of money and you make lots of good. Now, why is it so important? You know, what I used to say, that the significance of the information revolution and mobile. On the mobile side is that today, you know, mobile is the largest distribution network that is ever being created by mankind. I mean, you have 6 billion people who exceeded the 5.3 billion. You have 6 billion people that in a seamless way that you can tap into at any moment. So any concept, any business you actually develop, if it is mobile-based, potentially you can go to 6 billion people. There is no other kind of business that you can scale. And as we talk about innovation, one thing that I would, you know, just leave with you for the moment, park it, just keep in mind, the best ideas that you may have, if you don't scale, you cannot survive. Scalability is a key success factor for any innovative idea. So that's on the mobile. And why is it also to us so important from a development point of view? Because in many of the conferences I used to say, what we're talking about in terms of information revolution and disruptive technologies like Joe and Pete will talk about some examples, is that what they offer is access. Okay? And access means information. Information means knowledge. Okay? Knowledge means opportunity. Opportunity means empowerment. So that's really the sequence. So today, you know, where, you know, before, when we've talked about the ecosystem of innovation, if smart people, there's some people who are, you know, have the illusion that, you know, certain cultures or, you know, ethnicities have certain disposition to innovation, creativity more than others. You know, it's total myth, okay? You know, human beings around the world are equally smart no matter what they are. The question is, do they have the right enabling environment, and do they have access to the enabling tools? That's a fundamental issue. So what the information revolution has really disrupted the world is it flattened the world, you know, as Tom Friedman said. And today, you know, information access means knowledge. So you can be anywhere and access the information, and you can be anywhere and access the markets. I mean, you need markets and you need knowledge. So you come up with the idea and the markets. And that's really what the information revolution did. So in my projecting, you know, the future, you know, if you look at certain industrial revolution hubs of the past, you know, the industrial revolution was started in Europe, then US. It was very highly concentrated. When you look at the internet revolution, or the, you know, what is called the information technology revolution, it started mostly concentrated here. So you look at the bubble, and we have pictures that show, you know, that kind of what we call innovation hubs, right? Little bit in Europe, and then, you know, some pockets in India, little bit in China, not much, and this one maybe Israel, etc. If you look at today, you know, the next, what I consider the next revolution, IT will continue, by the way, because everything will be an IT based. on the clean tech and the other next wave of which is the next industrial revolution, then you're going to talk about a mushroom of innovation hubs. Okay? And watch very carefully for China. Just keep your eye on China in terms of how much they're going to drive innovation on the next generation of energy-related solutions and clean tech. So, the world landscaping is really changing and the ecosystem is changing. Let me conclude and then, allow time for discussion. I'd like you to step back and ask yourself, why entrepreneurship and technology, which I thought won the topics of today, is so relevant, to yourself, to the world, development. Okay? If you look at what we are living in these days, we are really against very, very serious global challenges. And what are these? You have a highly leveraged global economy. Governments, watch the governments, that you thought that if you buy a bond from Italy or Greece, you don't have to ask questions, you don't have to do credit analysis as well, right? Well, now you can make 7% return if you want to buy an Italian bond. So the world economy is highly leveraged. Okay, the corporate world is highly leveraged as well. So you have a world which is so highly leveraged. What does it mean? It means already what used to be scarce capital, we just stretch it to its limits. So you have scarce capital. That's one thing which is very important. The second thing which is important is that world population is growing, while natural resources are being depleted. And all research will show you that the depletion rate of natural resources is faster than the replenishment rate. Doesn't matter what you're talking about. Commodities, water, etc. So that's another fact. So, and you have new large economies and populations that are entering, the world economy, China, India, the BRIC countries, mostly growing at a fast rate, more consumers. What does it mean? More demand on, natural resources. There is a study that someone presented, which is very interesting, French, very well known on carbon finance, showing by 2030, for example, okay, France has to do with 1/3 less imports of oil, no matter what they do, they like it or not, because we've passed the peak production of oil. So natural resources are producing. Of course, climate change, which I'm working on, is another challenge, and global warming. I always relate it to resources. So what does it mean? It means that you have to become by far more efficient as an economy. So a country like the US, when people ask me personal opinion, are you optimistic? I say, I can be very optimistic if you have a different kind of leadership and governance. But what it means for regular people, they have to shift their mentality from living from a world of abundance to a world of scarce resources. They just have to accept, that they have to live with less. And then otherwise, the US is much better positioned if they fix their political system. The third thing, which is very important, is youth population. You have, you look at India, for example, 70% younger than 35 years. You look at certain societies, 50% younger than 25, okay, with very serious unemployment, right? So you have unemployment, you have scarce resources, you have scarce capital, you have also other trends like climate change. Then you say, how do you solve the problem of the world? Well, and then of course in some societies, I consider youth and women to be the same class of disenfranchised, segments of the economy that are not part of a very productive, society. So you say, how do you solve these social problems? So I think what's going, in the coming years, we're going to shift the discussion from economic growth, because everyone is going to be disappointed on that, take my word on it, and much more to unemployment challenges. This is going to be the next one, right? Otherwise, in an information age, all what it takes about 10,000 people to go to the street, and then they will be followed by another 100, and then governance would become very difficult. So what it means is very simple in my simple mind, is that old ways of doing business cannot work anymore, and relying totally on the traditional, business institutions, the way they were structured, don't work anymore, right? because they're not inclusive, in terms of social development. And if anything, they're likely, if they don't, grow in terms of employment, they're likely to lay off people. And you in business school, you might want to start thinking differently. If your hope is to go and make quick money in investment banking or Wall Street, you might want to change your mind for a while finally, because it really stores some of our best brains, and in many cases not with the best standard of ethics. So when we look at this, then the conclusion is very simple. We just have to find different ways of doing business and managing and governing. That's what it is. So we have to look for disruptive solutions. We have to look at transformational solutions. And that's why today it is feasible. It's because of the information technology. It's because, now you can talk about a world where all the players, not only 1 or 2 or 3 countries can dominate, but anyone, anywhere, can actually, be a player in that global economy. And innovation, in fact, can happen anywhere because of access to information. So we are, and the reason why this is important is because unless we do that, especially in very traditional societies, then we will not be able to address the challenges of the youth and disenfranchised classes or segments of the economy. So the only way that's going to happen to create these opportunities is to promote entrepreneurship, so that the youth, the disenfranchised class that have been marginalized in the economy, can now act and then can contribute to economic growth in a different way than the traditional establishment, and then can help to create job opportunities, which is very important. And that's why, personally, if there is one subject today, as I leave IFC, and which I will certainly will continue to be involved in, is what I would call social entrepreneurship and grassroots innovation. It is indeed the kind of future that can make a difference in our lives. So what I will save for later is that we've invested very heavily around the world in very low-income countries to growing economies like China and Russia and so on. And I would be very happy then to present my own views about some of the challenges on how do you create the environments and how, what are the conditions of success and risks and challenges for a typical entrepreneur in Africa or elsewhere to be able to take a concept from inception all the way to commercialization to sustainability. And I'll stop there.
So it's strange to me to be on a panel at a business school in the first place because I'm a doctor, and I didn't anticipate that I would ever be involved in business or an entrepreneur, etc. When I finished college, I worked as a computer programmer. I guess that was sort of in business. I was working for a bank. And then I decided to go back to medical school, become a pediatrician. I worked for the Centers for Disease Control for some years, doing outbreak investigation kind of things. And so the question is, how did I ever possibly get to this stage where I'm sitting here telling people how to be an entrepreneur? I think what has happened, and I think you've already touched on it obviously quite a lot, this incredible explosion of information technology. I think there's only one real precedent for what we're seeing right now in terms of with mobile, with so-called cloud computing, and that's really the printing press. Right? So if you look back to the printing press, you're talking about a change from maybe 5% tops people in Europe being able to read, which is to say being able to scale ideas, right? To a situation where 100 years later was 30%, 100 years later was 90%. Right? So what we're talking about there is the book as a platform for the exchange of information, and what we're talking about now really is the extension of the internet as that platform. Back in I don't remember when it was, when the Macintosh first came out, I know the slogan for the first Mac, 1984, was the computer for the rest of us. But it's clear that Steve Jobs in that particular case was woefully wrong. The Macintosh, which was probably cost about $3,000 at the time, was the computer for a very tiny elite on the planet. And it's very clear at this point that the computer for the rest of us is the mobile phone. So really, when people talk about mobile, there's a lot of buzzwords, people talk about cloud computing. Really what we're talking about is the extension of the internet, the extension of the platform to more people, and the lowering of the cost of scale. So getting back to, how did I get here? The problem that I've been particularly looking at over the course of almost 20 years now is the problem of information collection and distribution for health. Right? So people may not realize, but if you go to developing countries, well, actually, you may realize this because who participated in the U.S. Census last year? Anybody fill out a census form? I hope somebody filled out a census form. And you notice that the census form was what? It was paper, right? So even in a country with incredibly high internet penetration, there wasn't even an option for you to fill out your census form on the web, right? So we basically blew billions of dollars, at least hundreds of millions of dollars in postage, because apparently the government has not heard of SurveyMonkey. Right? I mean, you could probably have done you could probably have provided a web option for free on SurveyMonkey. Well, in developing countries, it's even worse. In the United States, we have lots of sources of information. Some of them are paper-based, like the U.S. Census. But other things, if a kid gets born in the United States, there's a hospital registry. By law, every kid gets registered. So it's into a computer system from the day that you're born. In other countries, pick a country in the developing world. We don't even know how many kids there are in those countries. We don't know how many people get born. We don't know how many people die. I was talking to the head of monitoring and evaluation for UNAIDS, the UN AIDS agency, HIV agency, and they confirmed to me that after 7 years of spending literally billions of dollars on HIV/AIDS in Africa, billions of dollars. Now, you want to talk about a potential business opportunity or a potential market, right? People think there's no money in international development. This is billions of dollars spent each year on one disease in one region. The sad part is that after doing that, we still don't know if HIV/AIDS in Africa is actually going up or going down. Right? That's the kind of information technology that up until very recently we've had to use within international health, trying to solve the big problems of populations in terms of health problems. Now, it's not like we haven't had successes in the past, like smallpox being eradicated back in the 1970s, but we were saying before when we were out in the hallway, I mean, I can't even imagine now how they managed to coordinate an international smallpox vaccination program back in the 60s and 70s to be successful when they didn't even have email. I mean, I guess they just made $10 a minute, long distance phone calls back and forth to each other. But it's astonishing. So again, we have this information infrastructure that's now been kind of dumped in our laps, and we have this tremendous problem within public health, and I would say within business and within all other endeavors within emerging countries where we just don't have information. So looking at this, 15 years ago, I began to think, well, maybe we can use things like PDAs, like Palm Pilots. Palm Pilots, which 5 years ago was kind of like amazing, and now seems like you're talking about the Victrola. So I began to look at ways in which we could use Palm Pilots to do data collection. In fact, it began developing software and started bringing in software programmers and coming up with a solution to help us collect information better. Instead of collecting it on paper, like the US Census does, to be able to collect it on some kind of a computing platform. And just to give a bit more context, typically if people want to find out in, let's say, Botswana or Cambodia, even what percentage of the children in that country are malnourished, they have to go out and visit 20 or 30,000 households, right, with about 30 sheets of paper, asking a bunch of questions to try and get a representative sample so they can actually come up with a reasonably true answer or an estimate of what the problem is. This is also the case, and then here's another business opportunity, this is also the case for commercial endeavors. People want to go out into, again, Botswana, Cambodia, Bolivia, they want to find out how many people use a particular brand of soap powder. They've got to do the same thing. They've got to visit 20 or 30,000 households, generally with sheets of paper. So what we're trying to do is basically shift that over to electronic data collection. Now, getting on to why I'm at the business school, when I first started looking at this issue of electronic data collection, I was working for the US government. And I had some of the ideas that, in fact, we've now put into practice at my company, Datadyne. What I realized, I'd like to say I realized it quickly, but in fact it was over a period of too many years, I realized that the government is not the place to be if you want to do technology innovation. Now, this should not have been a shock, all right, because if you thought, well, where do we want to sort of have an entrepreneurial spirit and welcome new ideas, would that be within the world's largest bureaucracy? Probably not. All right. But being a slow learner, it took me several years to get to that stage. I finally said, okay, well, I believe in the ideas and the kind of software that we're creating for this mobile data collection. I believe in it enough that I'm going to leave my job and I'm going to start this company, Datadyne. At the time that I started it with my business partner, Rose, I think neither of us actually thought that we were creating a business. I mean, we knew we had made an LLC, but the reason we made an LLC here in Washington, a limited liability company, instead of a 501c3 or a nonprofit, was just because you could do an LLC in a day in Washington. And I think we thought at the time, you know, we'll be grant supported. We'll just get money from grant foundations, et cetera. And that's what we tried to do, and that's, in fact, what we were able to do. So we had kind of the good luck and, in a sense, the bad luck of being able to get money, get funding from people who were not our potential users. Right? Our potential users were, say, health officials, health workers in developing countries who needed to go out and collect this information. But we got grants from the World Bank, we got grants from the United Nations Foundation, Vodafone Foundation. Really valuable. I think of it now kind of as startup funding that enabled us to create the first versions of our software. But we quickly also realized that there was a limitation and a problem with getting all our money from those grants. And you know, on the pure business side, you would never find a VC in Silicon Valley who would say, yeah, I think your business plan, which is that we, the VCs, will fund you now and forever, that seems like a fine business plan. Right? A venture capitalist understands that the whole point is to get their money back and more, and therefore you, the entrepreneur, need to develop new revenue streams, right? That's inherent in your business plan. On the international development side, that's actually typically quite unusual, the idea that you would get funding from your users or your beneficiaries. Right? The idea is that your business plan is that you're going to apply for grants now, meaning like startup funding now, and then you're going to keep applying for it next year and 5 years from now, et cetera. Now, for many companies that work within international development space, that's a fine business model, and you can make a lot of money doing that, doing good and making a lot of money. The problem with that business model is that business model doesn't scale well. Right? There are many, many organizations, many for-profit and non-profit, and frankly, I don't really see a distinction in the way that these organizations act. There are many for-profit and non-profit companies within international development whose model is the consulting model. Right? The idea is that we're going to go to your country, we're going to send 10 people. The more people we send, the more money we make. The more countries we go to, sending people on the ground, the more money we make. But imagine if, when you wanted to buy a book from Amazon.com, Jeff Bezos had to send somebody to your house, right? I mean, to make the sale, not to deliver the book, right? Although he's actually getting rid of that delivery process too, with the Kindle. Imagine if that was the case. Obviously, Amazon.com wouldn't be what it is. Again, connecting this kind of need for technology in the developing world and this incredible new scaling infrastructure of the internet, the cloud, the mobile system now, we have the opportunity to break away from that consultant model. Right? We have the opportunity to disrupt that particular model, which helps the people that actually can afford to pay for those consultants, but it doesn't help anybody else. To bring it back to something everybody knows, everybody here has, I'm assuming, a Gmail account, Yahoo Mail account, Hotmail account maybe for the older folks in the crowd, right? Anybody here not have a webmail account? Right. This is something that you actually share in common with every single health worker in the developing world. Right? Every single employed health worker in the developing world above the village level also has a Gmail account, or a Yahoo Mail account, or a Hotmail account. Sometimes all three. Right? Tremendously useful to them. What did it cost them? Nothing. Did they have to get trained on it? No. Did Google, for Gmail, send people out to the countries to sign MOUs, memorandum of understanding with these countries? Did they do training sessions? No, they didn't. This new technology and this new infrastructure and the low-cost nature of scale on the internet, in the cloud, if you will, has enabled us to see that it's possible to get useful technology for data collection, for email, for mapping, for a whole bunch of different things, out to people in the world who need it, not just people in California or people in Washington, but actually to get this out to people in the developing world who need it. What does it cost to Google to add another Gmail account? It's like 0.00001 cent. If Google had to send people to the country, Google would go out of business, right? Google's model pays Google more the more it scales. As an international public health doc, my goal is to get useful technology not just into the hands of organizations that can pay for it, but in the hands of everybody. And the model that we see, the only model that has successfully done that has actually managed to get technology into the hands of everybody that needs that, is the commercial, proprietary, right out of Silicon Valley, Gmail, Google Maps, Facebook, Twitter model. The significance of mobile is simply that now, let's say 5 years ago or 10 years ago, that model could only reach people who had access to the internet. That meant people who had access to laptops and desktops. That's a tiny fraction of people in the developing world. The new model is that now, even in sub-Saharan Africa, which is the least connected place on Earth, there's about a 50% penetration rate. And so now you can extend those same low-cost models, which are good for business. Obviously, Google is doing pretty well. But they're also good for doing good because you're giving capacity to people in those countries, capacity that doesn't depend on having a guy that looks like me go out to those countries. You're helping people to break away from that consultant model. Again, Google gets paid more, Facebook gets paid more, the less it has to actually go into your country, right? The less it has to actually send boots on the ground or send people into your country. The consultant model builds dependence in these countries. The model of not requiring a consultant frees people from dependence. It gives them the tool, like Gmail or Google Maps or Facebook. We've all seen what that can do in North Africa. It gives them the tool without the need to pay for the consultant. And what we're doing at Datadyne is we're applying that same tool to providing we're applying that same technology to providing specific tools to let people do public health better. So what I would say, I mean, just before we move on to the next panelist and then later the discussion is, for a business school crowd, to me, the point is this is enormous opportunity. You can write an app, you can write a program here, you can sell it, provide it, you can fund it by advertising, and you can reach an incredibly huge audience that you never could have reached before. And in many cases, by doing that, whether you're commercial, you're non-commercial, whether your app is specifically designed to try and do good, or if, like Twitter and Facebook, it was designed to help people share photos and share concepts, but is doing good anyway, like the mobile phone, regardless of what your goal is, the fact is you can actually reach many, many more people. You can reach a majority of the world's population actually now with these incredibly useful tools and allow them to, again, instead of being dependent on development consultants, you can allow them to actually use the tools and choose what they want to use them for and determine their own course. So I'd be happy to talk to folks after or during the discussion, but that's what we're about.
Thanks, Joel. Well said. To the point where I am, because I've been a part of a number of startups. I was a part of 3 different startups. I'm from Seattle. Started back in the bubble days, about '97, with an e-commerce startup. And went through the whole bubble experience, which was pretty interesting. And then I went on to join the CTO of Adobe, a guy named Bill McCoy. We spun out a company out of Adobe. Adobe owned 99% of the desktop imaging publishing market. And there was no place for them to grow other than into the network. So we started a suite of network appliances that used Adobe technology to automate the delivery of images and graphics to any mobile device in the world. That was in 2000. That was before camera phones even made it to the US, but they were being used extensively in Japan and Europe. And we saw growth in that direction. That company, after 9/11, and we were negotiating a second round of funding. We were in the process of basically knowing that we were going to take a down round of funding, so we folded all of our intellectual property back into Adobe, and that product line became known as Altercast. I then joined another startup that sought to fix a number of the communication challenges that were experienced on 9/11, security, interoperability, sustainability of communications. That company was called Coca Communications. It's still around today. And I made it to DC because I was tasked with introducing this technology to the government. So we worked with a lot of government agencies, intelligence agencies, DoD, Homeland Security, in introducing and implementing a new technology, which was an interesting experience. But after 6 years and being a fully vested founding member of that team, I decided it was time to take a broader look at the technology landscape and see what was going on, especially in light of the economic downturn, and started to read up on all of the different theories of innovation. Most, I think importantly, Clayton Christensen's ideas of disruptive innovation. How many folks in this room are aware or have read, how many have read The Innovator's Dilemma? Okay, so a few of you. How many are aware of disruptive innovation in terms of a theory?
Whoever hasn't read that book, by the way, needs to leave right after this and go buy that book.
Right. I absolutely agree. That book really changed my life a lot, because immediately I looked back on the 3 startups that I'd been a part of for the previous decade, and I realized we really missed the opportunity to position ourselves in a disruptive way. And when I say missed it, I mean go back to the beginning of the technology, go back to the beginnings of the company, and understand the market that we were trying to go after, and who we could serve, and how we could be disruptive in that market. And the number one principle I think that folks miss with regards to disruption is serving the underserved. who is not being served by the current market in some way. That is your market opportunity. And I think Joel hit it on the head. That's what's happening on a global scale, is there is a massive market that is going to be served, or is being served, by free email accounts and by very, very inexpensive telecommunications. And that once you make that connection, the disruptive opportunities start to open themselves up. But we didn't understand that in all three of the startups that I was a part of. We didn't understand some very simple principles of disruption. We like to say that we were disruptive. We like to say that we were a disruptive technology. However, we really didn't know what we were talking about. And that's true today with a lot of entrepreneurs. So, come 2008, I knew I wanted to start something that dealt with putting a focus on disruptive innovations across different industries. I knew that I would want to have this be an interactive company that would be able to leverage the thinking and ideas of the crowd at the same time. And I knew I wanted to develop a mobile app. So I didn't have the full concept baked yet, but I started to look for mobile developers to start to talk about this concept. I had a hard time finding them. There wasn't any place to go. So I started something called MoDevDC to bring the mobile developers to me. And it was very simple. I started it with a disruptive platform called meetup.com. Very simple, very easy. It cost me $70. Within a week, I had 17 developers at my door. Within a month, we had 50. Today, we have 1,500. We're one of the #1 mobile developer meetups in the country. This is how we launched this conference. And that's a little sidebar, but it's now become an LLC that I operate, and it's another business. But through the process of finding these developers and making these concepts, I came up with the idea of Disruptathon. The idea of Disruptathon is basically picking a topic, picking an area, a disruptive shift, whether it's healthcare, whether it's clean technology, whether it's media, social media, mobile applications, or major events. And I'll get to that in a second. We could create an event around that and attract some of the new disruptions and do something fun that's good for society, that's good for the entrepreneurs, gives them notoriety, and it's also good for sponsors. So that's how I came up with the concept of Disruptathon. I was walking on the beach down in Bethany, Delaware, and literally the name just hit me in the head. I went back to the condo, got online, and the URL was available. I was kind of shocked, given the history of the internet, that name hadn't been registered. But I registered the URL. I used WordPress, a free content management system, and built a website that afternoon, and applied for the LLC the following week. And I had a new company, and I was off to the races. And within 100 days, I held my first event here in Washington, D.C. That was focused on mobile applications. And we had a competition. We had 11 mobile apps developers, and folks used the technology that I developed with one of the partners I'd met through MoDevDC, and the rest is history. We've now had 13 events, and this afternoon I leave for London, where I'm putting an event on around the Olympics. One of my sponsors is the British Embassy, UK Trade and Investment. And I'm taking the Disruptathon platform, and I'm going to seek to go around the world where innovation is really needed, and hold events that are unique, but that also highlight the disruptive shifts that are happening, and highlight the disruptive entrepreneurs, people like Joel, that are doing things to improve society. So it's become a creative platform for me. It's become my own entrepreneurial platform to build a business. I think every day about the things I can do to build a scalable business, a scalable long-term model. My strategy was to initially build a strong lifestyle company. I've taken no investment. I built the organization on my own funding and bootstrapping. And I'd say get through 3 major events in 2012, and then start to figure out how I might be able to scale this. There's a saying in entrepreneurship that I liked recently called "ownership is the new exit." So I think that there's a lot of reasons for that saying. because of what we've learned in the bubble, where companies went out and leveraged themselves, and then they didn't own their company anymore, or they didn't own the direction of their company. So their creativity was pushed out, and those companies, many of them died, and many great ideas died along with it. So there's a number of reasons why I think we're in a really, really cool period for entrepreneurship. One is just facts. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of new companies every year in this country that are starting because because the barriers to starting a company are so low. With the mobile application space, you can have an idea, you can get an app up, you can start a website using free open source CMS. There's so many things that you can do now that used to be very capital intensive that are no longer capital intensive. So there are a lot of different disruptive tools to leverage as entrepreneurs that then allow you to put your focus where it's going to be most important. And the most important component of your focus is your creativity and your passion for solving problems in different areas of the economy. It used to be you had to think about all of the aspects of building a business, and now I think you've got the benefit of just focusing on certain aspects of building a business, the creative aspects, the disruptive aspects, identifying who is the underserved market that I can go after in order to launch my company. So we're in a great period of, I'd say, hyper innovation. Just in my small group, 1,500 people, there are just hundreds of companies in there that have just started in the last few years doing really, really amazing things. Now, they're not all profitable yet. You still have to find a way to get to profitability, but that's what you're in business school for. Those are the disciplines that you learn in business school. What you may not learn in business school are the creative aspects and maybe I'm not. I'm sure that there's a lot of creativity taught here, but I think there are a lot of barriers that are lowered now for people like yourselves to get into business. So let's see here. What else do I want to share? So I think that if any advice I could give, I think it would be around staying involved in areas that you're passionate about. I think one of the things that make the co-panelists here successful is I really get a sense that they're very passionate about the areas, whether it's global development and investment or medical. Obviously, Joe's trained in medicine, but he's also very passionate about healthcare and care. I'm very passionate about bringing people together and seeing the results of that lead to an improvement of lives of the people that I bring together, growth of business and growth of economy. And one thing I see repeatedly over and over and over again is the successful entrepreneurs that I meet are incredibly passionate. A great quote from a guy in my group named Paul Murphy. Paul's a great example of kind of this new entrepreneurship. He was a .NET developer. So sitting in the back room developing .NET applications for XYZ company. Along comes the iTunes App Store. And Paul says, I'm a developer, I'm bright, I could probably figure out applications to build for the market. And I held a Disruptathon event with the owner of Ben's Chili Bowl. How many are familiar with Ben's Chili Bowl? All right, so maybe just a little example of how this company that I developed is helping to drive the economy. So the family at Ben's Chili Bowl wanted an app. So what we did was we put together a Disruptathon event around Ben's Chili Bowl to find the most disruptive app that can be developed for Ben's. And we put out a call for folks to develop applications for Ben's. We did a down select and we had 4 finalists to the restaurant. One of those 4 finalists was a guy named Paul Murphy, the .NET developer sitting in the back room, hated his job because all he did was develop for a living and he wasn't using his creativity. But he developed an app on iOS, on the iPhone, for Ben's Chili Bowl. And when he got up, he said, I've been working for the man for so long. I'm tired of working for the man. I thought that if I win this contest, I don't have to work for the man anymore because this is going to launch my company. And long story short, he won the Ben's Chili Bowl contest. He launched his own company, and today he's the owner of a very successful mobile development company called 3Advance. And I was talking to him last week, in doing a little bit of research. I'm leading a webcast for O'Reilly Media Thursday night. I'll actually be in London, but I'll be leading this webcast. The title of the webcast is The Changing Role of the Mobile Developer. And the whole purpose is to put a highlight on the fact that the mobile developers have shifted their role in an organization because they play a pivotal role now in sales, marketing, and accounting because they were the first into the iTunes stores. They're the first into the Android stores. They actually know the landscape a lot better than most business owners. So they find themselves educating the entire ecosystem of company on mobile strategy, and that's shifted. So Paul Murphy went from being in the lower left-hand quadrant of an organization, and I can't do the chart, but an organization where they have very little focus, very little budget authority, and they have very little human contact, to where he has a lot of face time, human contact, and he has entire budget authority. And that is true for developers. They've shifted their role today. But Paul said to me last week, he said, you know, I was talking to him about the sales process. He said, you know, I don't sell. I don't sell. I just go in and talk what I'm passionate about, and I am getting orders. I was just like, man, you just hit it on the head. It's a great quote, so I'll use that quote a lot. I don't sell. I just talk what I just speak about what I'm passionate about, and that's pretty cool. So, you know, my job's just going to get more fun all the time because I get to meet innovators every day at all levels. And I get to meet innovators that are just starting out. I get to meet people that are doing global scale disruptions, and I think that it all comes back to the same thing, and that is what I talked about at the beginning, is understand who the underserved market is. And I think you'll always be in a pretty good position. The technologies that are available to you now, so we talk about cloud technologies, we talk about the iTunes and the Android and the Windows and the Obis and the other app stores that are out there around the world. Free social networking sites. There are so many tools that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And all of these tools can be seen as disruptive enablers, enabling you to be disruptive. But your job is to identify who's underserved, be passionate about what you're doing, and go for it.
Thank you. Let's give him a
I'm a first year MBA student here, the MBA program. My question to you is, you were going to speak on the challenges to entrepreneurship, especially in the emerging markets. What do you think are the differences based on, like when you go into Western Africa, you have governance issues. When you go into India, you have population issues and non-education issues. And Dr. also said that there are problems especially which are related to people not having management skills. How do you think that without giving them management skills, you're going to encourage entrepreneurship in such areas?
So, can you repeat the question so that everybody can hear it?
Well, let me repeat the question. Basically, what it takes and what are the challenges for an entrepreneur in the developing countries compared to, let's say, the Western world, right?
Precisely.
Okay. Look, I mean, I gave you, in sort of a global perspective, the reason why, because I just wanted to build up the case in front of you to start thinking about seriously about considering a different career path as you go through college and beyond college than the traditional way of going to one of these big names and making a difference. That's really the reason why I gave you. I mean, I believe this is indeed the era for many of the reasons that Pete and Joe talked about. This is the era of entrepreneurship and just thinking about different business models. So what does it take? Now, in reality, what we've done, we've invested a lot. So let me try to summarize some of our experiences and the difference between, let's say, starting up a company in Silicon Valley or here or somewhere else, and starting up a company in let's say, Africa or India or China, because there are differences. Certain things that we've learned. I mean, when we did even venture capital, IFC, traditionally we did project finance. And we are the largest multilateral institution for supporting private sector. I would say, in all modesty, definitely we are the largest multilateral financier of mobile and telecom in developing countries, particularly countries like Africa. Right? And if I have to think about what makes me proud of in my career, is indeed, contributing to changing the perception of Africa. Today, yes, it is less than 50% in Africa, the penetration, but when we started working, it was less than 2% or 1%. So in Africa, is the eye of investors today. And I think part of the reason it's the fastest growing telecom, and it really changed the perception. So, but then doing this kind of business is very different than doing, let's say, venture capital and startup. Why? The first thing that we've learned as an investor is that venture capital is not about financing or investment. Venture capital is about building companies, right? So many of our staff, professional staff, are very good of doing, projection and Excel spreadsheets. But Guy would know very well, that the traditional thing, even our term sheet used to say, okay, sponsor. So the traditional way of doing business in developing country was relying on deep-pocketed, competent, technically sponsor, and playing a passive role in investment. Actually, in venture capital, you have to be very proactive, and you have to know how to build up companies, right? So that's the first thing, which is very important, right? The second thing is that, which is also very important, is that, you are taking a very high risk pre-revenue, effectively, or pre-definitely, if not revenue. Pre-revenue will be very early seed capital, but definitely pre-profit. So you're not doing spreadsheets and finding out what's the debt service cover ratio, and you have to have tolerance for failure. Okay, big institutions don't have. The typical thing is you have home runs about out of 10 about 2. You have complete busts about 2 or 3, and the rest is in the middle. Venture capital firms make their money on the home runs, right? But you have to have tolerance. One of the things, let me start with the cultural aspect. One of the first things I've learned in my first visit to Silicon Valley, okay, on during still the bubble, at the peak, in fact, what everyone wanted, and we were doing a global joint venture with SoftBank, the largest internet investor, to roll out all of these internet models in developing countries. And I'll come to the underside. Is that there is a cultural aspect of venture capital, and there is an ecosystem, because exactly, you have passionate people with the right concept. They don't know how to build up a company. So, but then if they need, an investor in Silicon Valley, they turn around, they know these venture capital firms or angel investors or what we call seed capital, and all of them are different, actually, and then until you get to private capital. So they find the investors, and these investors, not they provide capital, it's not a capital game only, it is all the technical support they offer them in building the companies, building the management, connecting them to the network. Okay, so that's one thing that is here, which is not in most of our markets, right? So that's very important. Second, is that if you fail, which is very interesting, not even Europe, okay, they call them serial entrepreneurs. If you go and apply to venture capital, almost like serial killer, when they say serial entrepreneur. You say, I started this company, it went bust. I started another company, and so on. A smart venture capital investor would take this in your favor, that you are a risk taker, you're an entrepreneur, you are willing to put your future at stake. In many cultures, if you go bankrupt, you're tainted forever. And that's so, to me, was so striking, right? So that's another thing that doesn't exist, right? The other thing is that, when you have the capital, which is not available as well, right? And then you scale. Then the other thing which I said, and it came up in many times in Pete's and Joe's comments, scalability is key to success. If you don't scale, you're not going to make it. And the opportunity that the internet and the mobile gives you over anything, including clean tech today, is the fact that if you come up with the right idea, you can tap into a huge network, so you can scale very quickly. If you come up with, you know, a nice renewable energy solution, you're still talking about limits to how fast you can scale. So, you know, those who were in the US and developed their ideas, they had, you know, access to a huge market, well-developed market. If, you know, we invested in a company in South Africa, state-of-the-art component software technology for financial institutions, okay? Perfect, you know? The reason why it went bankrupt is because when it was ready, it was going to go into joint venture with a German company, financial institution, and then there was a bust. This whole IT company, they went bust. This company didn't want to make the investment. They simply couldn't go outside South Africa, you know. So one of the most, so when we're talking about the, and then let me, you know, say one more thing, and then I'll get you to the other side. Then the most important thing is investors, right? And they have a limited time horizon because they have to give returns to their LPs, their limited partners, right? You need to have exit. If you don't have exit, you know, in venture capital, it's very hard to get people to come and invest in you know? I mean, besides, you know, getting some grants at the early stage. So when you look at it in terms of the process, you get the concept, you have some angel investors, throw some money in, then you get seed capital, then venture capital, then sometimes, if you're lucky, you get some private equity and some different financing, but you need to exit to generate value for investors. Because the founders end up maximum, generally speaking, on average about 20%. That's really 20, 30%. This is, you know, and this is great because of a huge pie. And then there is a notion of partnership, you know, which is, you know, basically, you know, I come in, okay, you know, unlike many other cultures, oh, this is my idea, this is my business, I don't want to give it up, you know, and as a result, you know, they keep it small. However, you know, here, you know, you start, you get investors, you say, I'm much better off with 20% of a huge business than having 100% of a small business that may not survive. We go to the other side, and I will conclude here. First, in many of, it's not a matter of just, I would say, governance per se, like, you know, when you have, political governance, because if you take the India experience, you know, many of the people in the IT industry, they say the best thing that happened is the government didn't notice us, right? Yeah. You know, we slipped under the eyes of the government, right? By the way, in cellular, let me tell you, this is something I can tell you from my experience, and I've worked around the world, okay? If ever governments notice the potential of cellular would not be here, they would have killed it. Right? Right? The only reason why cellular made it is because every single person underestimated and projected the potential of cellular. I can show you, you know, even us who believed in it, you know, something in Jordan, we brought a consulting firm, they estimated the market in 15 years to be 70,000. That's it. And they said to the government, do one license. I said, you're crazy, right? So there we have, you know, at most estimated the market to be 2%. Of course, it's over 100%. If the governments noticed that this is going to be the case, they would have killed cellular. Immediately, regulated and killed it, right? So, you know, it's not necessarily that kind of governance, but it is the whole, you know, enabling environment and ecosystem within the country. So one challenge is that, you know, there isn't a culture of the risk-taking on entrepreneurs. So many of the places where they start, except for the middle large economies like India, China, big, okay, you end up getting family money and starting it. That's one thing, right? So you don't have the angel investors, you don't have the seed investors. The second one that you don't have is most of the markets are too small to scale your idea to a level where it is at least sustainable, more or less, before you take it cross-border. So as opposed to big markets, you know, like the US, like China, where you can develop a concept for the local market and then take it international, if you are in a developing country, you have almost, you know, a condition to immediately develop a concept cross-border or global play, right? So, I mean, I agree on the underserved. I tell you, this is all what we've done. You know, it's so interesting. In the last 5 years, people discovered the underserved in the world, right? I used to go to the GSM Association convention, okay? They didn't want to talk about it. Now the interesting thing in the mobile industry, you go there, that's the only talk, this is the only growth, and the color of the people who attend have changed because most of the top 10 players right now are not from US, not from Europe. It's the other way. It's from the other economies, which is so interesting because also it slipped under the radar of, you know, the Western companies as well, right? And they just didn't. Third thing, which is very important, is exit. How to create value very quickly, assuming you come up with a model. So I mean, you know, even in a place like China, which is putting so much pressure on developing the local stock exchange, okay? Or even in India, which is really now well developed as a stock exchange. But the dream of every IT company is to list on NASDAQ or one of the international to start being. So when you look at all of these things, right, you know, the challenges that you have is, you know, coming up, you know, I mean, I admire what I've heard really in both instances, and we finance many companies like this, you know, that do mobile banking. There's another one, health in Africa, that collect data through SMS and so on. But the challenge is, you know, how do they go to the next level, right? And how they create value, and how they build up companies, and how they secure, you know, exit so that they can attract more investments, you know. So I would, you know, so really here, I would pick on one of the things that Pete said. You know, when you want to move into that direction, and what I've seen, and this is one thing I would do when I want to invest. The first thing I would have, because all the projections you learn, and you know, the poor staff that spend nights and nights before they come to investment committee that I chair, you know, and they bring me this projections model like this, right? You go like this. All it takes, I would sit, I want to see that entrepreneur and look in her eyes or his eyes and see, do they have the right concept? Do really have their passion and they're putting their life, you know, on the line for something like this? If that's the case, then that we start at the beginning. Then, when we sit in the investment committee, right, and we discuss a startup business, okay, as opposed to a loan, right, or a project finance, all the discussion is not about financial projections, not about debt service. It's all about what does it take to build up that business and this company? Where are the gaps in the management? What's the structure of the board? What are the voting rights? What are, you know, the, you know, exit mechanisms, etc. So it's a completely different play than when you do, you know, straight financing. Okay, and many of the countries unfortunately don't have it, but I'm much more optimistic right now because the world realizes the growth is going to be in these markets, especially with the crisis in Europe and the West. And two is because of these new technology networks that would enable anyone, exactly what Pete said, you know, barriers to entry. In the past agricultural revolution, you wanted the land. Industrial revolution, you needed the capital technology. Here, all what you have is a cheap access. That's it. If you have cheap access, then you get all the information and the markets you want at your disposal.
Pete, do you want to add anything to that question? Just because I think you're looking at it from a different perspective. You're actually building something while he's financing or giving venture.
What was the question again?
What are the challenges and what does it take in the developing country to build up a startup compared to the West?
Yeah, I would just say that the tools are freely available now to start a company, and so the barriers, the challenges, I think, are challenges I'm not really aware of because I'm not in the developing countries and I haven't been spending time there. But I'm sure that there are social challenges that we're not aware of that don't exist in this country, that you can just, you know, somebody could just start a business and start marketing. It's not that easy in a developing country because of other factors that I'm sure exist. But I think the capital requirements are very, very low now, which is a blessing, and that's gonna spawn innovation and entrepreneurship and growth. And I'd say that, you know, in developing countries and countries that are experiencing extreme economic shock right now, that's very, very important, and that's going to be a big part of the rebirth and the growth in this country as well. You know, we are not going to have another industrial revolution. We're not going to become a manufacturing powerhouse. We've done those things. It's now our, you know, now the opportunity is to become a different kind of leader. And you know, we talk about the information age, we talk about services-based economies and all this stuff, but there are a lot of growth opportunities. There's going to be an explosion of data, and I think that that's what the cloud is also really about, is there's going to be so much data in the world that the opportunity is to build companies that help manage, help understand, analyze, and present that information to whoever needs it, and whenever they need it. And that's a pretty broad brush to paint, but those are big opportunities, and those opportunities will exist as well in developing countries.
But Pete, may I just make a comment? You're right, you don't need capital to start a company, but you need a lot of capital to scale the company and commercialize the company.
True. I actually disagree. I mean, our company actually, we got a lot of money, and we blew through a lot of money because we didn't have the pressure of having to support ourselves. We just thought we were going to get grants. Once we decided that we weren't going to apply for any more grants, we were going to start charging some of our users. I mean, we operate in a shoestring, and you know, we're in 170 countries. We have people using it. I mean, nowadays, the cost of actually, I mean, you know, there's a kind of the concept I think people have that, you know, you need venture capital, like the big successes in Silicon Valley. These are all venture capital, and of course there are, you know, huge successes like Google that are venture. But then if you look at, I mean, geez, even Apple when it started was nowhere near approaching kind of venture investment when it started. Nowadays, there's a lot of internet companies that can get started by, you know, three people in somebody's apartment, and if the software is compelling and it actually enables people to do something, things like the App Store, like Apple's App Store, have enabled people to have instant access to a market of 100 million people with credit cards and one-touch purchasing. You know, so it's, I think actually I think certainly you can, you know, use a lot of capital to build a business, but I think what we have now is something new, which is that you can actually develop a worldwide business possibly without all that extra capital. And in fact, there's a guy, there's a developer, I love to read his stuff, his name is Marco Arment, and he's been behind a bunch of successful tech projects, like he was one of the project engineers on Tumblr, which is one of the big blogging sites. And you know, he always says, he said, we didn't get a dime of any kind of investment funding. We just, I think, I'm going to misremember this quote, but his quote was, when people said, what's the business plan? He said, the business plan is to sell something to sell something to somebody and spend less than we make. And you know, again, when we're sort of all kind of always reading about venture capital and how important that is, it's important, I think, to recognize that, of course, most businesses in the United States or anywhere else don't get started by venture funding. They get started by what you were referring to, friends and family, people getting a second mortgage on their house. Nowadays, you don't even have to do the second mortgage in your house because you can instantly reach that audience of consumers, customers, users, you know, because of the internet. So it's, I mean, I agree with you. It's certainly one route you can go. The new thing is we have this new route that you can go. It just didn't exist before.
Yeah, we have a question.
With that being the case, oh, I'm sorry, Leonard Green, I'm an MBA student here at GW. With that being the case, at what point do you abandon bootstrapping then, if at all? Or do you simply let your sales carry you as far as they can go?
We're in an interesting situation at Datadyne because, again, we didn't actually know we were in business when we first started, right? We just thought we wanted to do something. We wanted to get better health data. And so we got, you know, we were lucky enough to get those grants that I mentioned. And that let us not think about our business model for years. And it was only when I noticed that I met one of the founders of Skype out in California, and you know, at a certain point in our history, I started getting invited not just to conferences at the United Nations, let's say, or the World Bank, but conferences out in California, kind of as the novelty act. You know, like, oh, look, this guy's kind of in technology, but he's sort of a doctor, he works in Africa, isn't that cute? And I'm not sure if they actually got anything out of me, except maybe some, you know, interesting photographs of mobile phones and lions. But But what I got out of them was realizing that all the stuff we were trying to do, which was get great software in the hands of the people who needed it and do it in a sustainable way, I just realized that people out in Silicon Valley were working on exactly the same problem. You know, we talked about sustainability, they talked about profitability. We talked about the sustainability model, they talked about the business model. It's the same damn thing. The only difference was they were doing it successfully and international development wasn't. And so, you know, on the technology side, I think again, we kind of coasted along on our grant funding for a while, and then I noticed after a while, and from talking to this guy at Skype, he said, we have a business model where we give away this fantastic service. Everybody knows, obviously, computer-to-computer calls. And he said it costs us almost nothing to provide that service because it's all based on the internet. And then we have another service, and we use the free service, computer-to-computer calls, to direct, as this is the first time I ever heard this term, as a sales funnel to channel people to, you know, a small percentage of those users to the service that actually costs us quite a bit of money to provide, which is computer-to-phone calls. And that, you know, he said, and it works out fine. We give an incredibly useful service to millions and millions and millions of people who love it for free. And we managed to fund that through providing this other service to a tiny fraction of those folks. And, you know, I heard him say that, and I was just like, man, I mean, of our potential users in global health, probably 99% of them really haven't got a dime, you know, haven't got any money to spend on this. And yet, there's other organizations working in international health who are working on $100 million USAID grants. You know, this business of doing cross-subsidization, I mean, I wonder if that could actually work for us. So we started to charge, we said, okay, we're going to develop a tiered system for our software, just like Skype, and we'll charge people for certain functionality. Thinking that it was kind of a necessary evil. I would have rather given this stuff away, right? I would have rather not charged anybody and just continued to get grants. But what I realized, and this is a long way to get to this point, once we started charging our users, I realized that when you get money from people who aren't your users, it's fine as a business model, but it doesn't help you make good software because you pay attention to your funders, and your funders aren't using the software. When you get money from your users, your life depends upon pleasing those users. And this is true whether or not your funders are the Rockefeller Foundation or your funders are venture capitalists. The difference is the Rockefeller Foundation is happy to keep funding you for, say, 5 years without you charging anything to your users and basically without you making good software. Whereas a venture capitalist at a certain point is going to be like, where's the revenue? And I don't mean the revenue from us, the VCs, I mean the revenue from your users. So what we've really found is that actually charging our users is the route to getting, you know, feedback. I mean, you know, anybody, you guys are in business school, you should be telling me this, right? You know, this is the incredible, fantastic, reciprocal relationship between a provider, between someone who's selling something and someone who's buying something, you know, between Whole Foods and its consumers. What we've just found is that we can apply this to international development too.
I had a question about the role of
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My name's Neha Shah. I'm an AMBA student here at, an accelerated MBA student here at GW. So I work full time as well. So my question was about the role of women here, because what I've noticed based on, you know, research I do based on for my work and just in general is that women often end up being the consumers of all these technologies, of all these opportunities, and very few of them seem to be emerging, whether it's in the developing countries or even in the United States, as the producers, the innovators, so to speak. And so I was just wondering if you disagree with that, or if you have something to add to that observation that I've sort of noticed.
I think it's definitely, the field is definitely male dominated for sure. I mean, Datadyne, you know, my co-founder Rose is a woman, I can assure you. And but yeah, I mean, I've noticed the same thing. Now, I mean, within international development and on a non-commercial side, there are lots of organizations like, I don't know if you've heard of Ushahidi, lots of organizations where some of the founders are women, but yeah, I agree with you, it's mostly male dominated.
Well, I mean, in developing country, you know,
Even here.
in developing country, it might be a little bit better in terms of when we looked at, because in our projects right now we have a requirement to show employment by gender, but the only thing is that a lot of the employment by gender is in these outsourcing companies as well as in call centers. You know, at the higher level, entrepreneurs you're beginning to see. But I think the prospects, you know, would be interesting could be better in developing countries, you know, as opposed to here. It's again because the IT is you know, you know, presenting itself as an enabling empowerment tool to the disenfranchised class, which I would say in general, except for a certain specific society, it's basically youth and women. So I you know, I guess, you know, there are some very positive signals. There's a company in Jordan, for example, educational, Novicon, which was started by a woman.
Which one is this?
I think if I'm not mistaken, it's Novicon, but Alicon can confirm to you. It produces all sorts of animated education products, and they were able to attract international investments.
Any other questions? Yes, back there. Then. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Radima. I graduated from the Elliott School. I studied international development. I wanted to ask you more about social entrepreneurship. What role do you see the private sector, sort of the traditional multinational corporation, playing, if any, in enabling social entrepreneurship?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, you know, Datadyne is often described as a social enterprise. Although I had never actually even heard the term until a couple of years ago. We won an award for being social enterprise. And the first I heard of it was when they called us to tell us we won the award. And then I went to Wikipedia to find out what it meant. I think this issue, literally. So, you know, Fast Company Social Enterprise of the year 2009, right? First we heard of it. I think, for me, the problem with social enterprise right now is, the problem is one of definition. So people are constantly talking about social enterprise, and I know some people who believe social enterprise means doing anything, including being an NGO, but somehow being entrepreneurial in a way that we can't exactly specify. For me, social enterprise is a business. You're doing a business, and for some reason, one of the things that drives you is the desire to achieve a social goal. I think from that definition, that's exactly what we do. You know, I mean, money's great, we're happy to make money, we're glad to be profitable, but it's not the reason why we're doing what we're doing. If you use that as your definition, though, I mean, at this point, like, is Jeff Bezos, is he driven by like the desire to make more money, to have more money in his bank account? You know, to me, the biggest social good, the biggest international development success that we've seen has been the mobile phone in terms of technology. And you know, the mobile phone is run as a for-profit business by enormous corporations. Is that bad? You know. So again, I think when people talk about social enterprise, pretty often, you can't have a useful discussion because everybody in the room has a different definition of what you're talking about. That's not very good linguistically, right? The thing, what I wonder about is, you know, since we are talking about international development, right, meaning international economic development, why do we care whether it's social or it's not? I mean, to me, like, the important thing is that in developing countries, or here for that matter, you want businesses that create jobs, that give people valuable work to do and provide useful services. So I'm in the weird position of being, you know, basically, I'm often asked to speak about social enterprise, and frankly, I'm not sure if it's a really useful term. I think business is good. I've taken a long, strange route to get to that stage, but I just think the important thing is not the social part, the important thing is the business part.
I would just like to add that I think that, you know, it requires entrepreneurs to create businesses that do social good. My opinion is that, you know, governments and NGOs don't necessarily do a good job of implementing businesses. They can provide services that provide social support, but businesses that ultimately lead to, you know, social good. And there's, you know, you can argue these things in terms of whether or not they really do social good, but I think I agree with Joel that economic development is social good, and entrepreneurs are really required for that.
So taking that concept, taking your definition, so then is the IFC a socially good multilateral agency?
I'm gonna say well, I mean, what do you expect me to say? I expect me to say no. That's so look, I mean,
because you preliminarily said you invested and you made people billionaires, but at the same
no,
time
but
said,
you know,
you said people benefit from it. So I see social good from there. So
no, look, I mean, you know, on telecom, you know, we have, unlike other financial institutions, we're evaluated on the basis of development impact, right? And it's an internal audit, it's independent. So, this is one of these historical unique situations where we were rated the highest on impact and the highest on financial return. And that's what I'm saying. It's not that easy to repeat. So when you talk about the impact, I agree. I really believe, as I said earlier, and what you said is that mobile is probably one of the best things that ever happened for the poor, right? In the meantime, what happened is that just because of the huge demand coupled by the sharp decline because of the learning curve and the cost, that made it so profitable. Right. This is a combination. I mean, the first generation of companies we financed, the average cost per line per subscriber, now there is a complete different, was about $2,000. So the company we financed that I referred to, Inform Zaire, it was someone who was former general manager of the Intercontinental Hotel with some Zairean. They got this license, didn't know what to do with it. So basically, they were the only functioning telephone company, but they made millions with like 5,000 subscribers. They paid immediately, from the subscription for the investment. Well, now you need millions of subscribers to break even. So that cost right now is down to like $50 to $100 per subscriber. Cost per minute used to be about 20 cents, 25 cents. In India, it's dropping below 1 cent. So I mean, the combination of both has made it. So really, the answer is definitely for us, no matter how attractive financially, if it doesn't have a positive economic and social development impact, we don't touch it. Going back to your question, I couldn't agree with you more, Joe. I mean, both on the definition and on the importance of translating any social concept or good, public good into sustainable business, right? But I think, the way I understand social entrepreneurship is to be like you, very confusing, but much broader than a business. Like what's happened in the Arab Spring in the Middle East, right? This would have never happened if it wasn't for the information networks. And we talk about, the great opportunities that, information technologies create, absolutely, and how disruptive, but they are disruptive in a different way as well. It's going to make governance by far more difficult because right now, countries which have been managed in isolation, right now they're exposed. You just can't block information anymore. So, and I remember, in one of the conferences in the World Summit, and we had President Wade from Senegal, my panel, and I said, it's great, to give information to people, create opportunities, but then the challenge is when people are exposed, right? Then they know what others have. They know there's so many choices as opposed to just knowing what they have, right? So the expectations of people, increase tremendously and their aspirations, and it becomes by far more difficult to manage societies, which actually is not able to meet these aspirations. So in my opinion, social networks, social entrepreneurship are going to have by far more profound impact on future social and governance structures than we anticipate today. I don't think it's going to be only about business, although I agree with you. When it comes to business, if that's what it is, then it has to be a sustainable, profitable business. But then, what is really referred to is that, right now is like this peer-to-peer kind of networks where you're exchanging information, knowledge in all directions, and then whoever picks up, idea, right, then, you can develop it and translate it into business. We have something, I don't know what happened to it, someone started, was featured CNN, called Evoke. You might look at it. Evoke, all right? And this is in Africa. Basically what it is, it's a social network that someone developed it in our group, and I supported him when I was around. And effectively, every month they have, let's say, the problem of the month in Africa, and let's say a health problem, and people will join and offer solutions, and then and people will vote on the winner. I mean, I'm just giving you an example of how so many ideas of these social networks can emerge. Some may end up to be only a public good, some might be a disruptive force, and some may be a business. But I don't think we should, in developing countries, it's not about business only. And I would even stretch it to say, no longer we can talk about developing countries to have different problems, than the Western. Because look what's happened in Europe, look what happened in London, look what's happening in New York. We're really, approaching an age of very restless young generation, right? That is somehow feeling, was deceived into the way that, the future has been designed. And yes, it's going to be by far more challenging than ours, by far, in terms of opportunities. And that's why I'm saying to you, don't think traditional only. What is the role of the big corporations? The smart ones are the ones who will engage with their societies. Those are the smart ones. And they will be ahead of the curve in understanding that if they connect in good governance, social governance, right, and thinking about having good social goods, okay, as opposed to just making money, they're serving their business interests in the long term by far better. On boards I served, I always told, the telecom companies that are very profitable, look, don't wait for governments to wake up and say, you're now richer than me, right? Go, take the initiative and offer what else I can do, to provide social good, because your margins are just too good to be true. And someone's going to wake up. And in many countries, those who did not were really heavily penalized because of that. So there are lots of things, and that's why it's very difficult in developing countries to figure out how it's going to be the landscaping of mobile, because the driver today, that take mobile banking, one of the things which we haven't figured out, is it going to be the M-Pesa model in Kenya, which is a mobile operator, or is it going to be a bank? What is going to regulate it doing? We financed a company fascinating with it in South Africa. They're struggling, independent. So we don't know. So really we're going to see lots and lots of shifts. But what I personally believe is that, no longer, and fortunately, in the long run, you're going to separate doing business from doing social good in the long term, right? And the smart ones, Nike, right now they're putting their patents, by the way, on the web. Okay, we're doing some partnership with them on sustainability, and they're inviting others to have, and we were thinking about doing, an exchange portal on research and knowledge. So people put all, because you shouldn't anymore just build up a business on the basis of IP, property knowledge. You should share it, and you should allow the world to tap into it so that creative ideas can come up. So it's really a very different, perspective that I look at it than, strictly in business.
We have one last quick question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Excuse me. My name is Dennis Chaffee. I'm a professor in the Decision Sciences Department, where I teach in the Project Management Program. A huge fraction of projects fail, and I think as an educator we learn a lot more from the ones that fail than the ones that succeed, but it's really hard to get people to talk about the ones that fail. So I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about either your own failures or failures you've seen, and maybe red flags that we should look out for.
Why don't we go around?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a part of 2 business failures, 2 startups that did not succeed, that ended up shutting down. And I'd say that, the number one lessons I learned, I take it in a couple different directions. I like to kind of take the human element, but I'd say, lack of humility, people's egos getting in the way of reality, and then I think, lack of kind of what I talked about in my introduction is it's not really understanding how to position the idea that we had into a market that was underserved. We were competing in the red ocean. We weren't trying to go towards the clean blue water where there were no other sharks. But I just say that, coupled with lack of humility, were two of the big reasons for our failure.
So a lot of times people peg what we do at Datadyne as being in the field of technology for development, or sometimes it's called ICT and the number 4, ICT for D, ICT for development, the trendy little acronym. And people talk about kind of lessons learned. People talk about exactly kind of the question you've asked. Anybody here know what the cargo cults were?
That's finding, right?
Right. So the cargo cults, these were basically, this is a phenomenon on some Pacific islands where the U.S. military had gone during World War II, and they had set up supply base stations, built runways, landed jets, control towers, or not jets, prop planes, control towers, the whole thing as supply way stations. And the people who lived on those islands, these primitive tribes, they were like, amazed at all the cargo, all this amazing, great stuff that came, was kind of brought to their island. When the war was over, not that they even knew there was really a war going on, when the war was over and all the planes went away, people, they said, wow, we got to bring the cargo back. We need more of this great stuff, so we'll smooth out the ground for a runway and we'll build a control tower out of bamboo and we'll wait for the cargo to come back. And this has come to be a sort of a synonym for viewing the superficial aspects of a process and not really understanding what the central aspects of the process were. In the field of technology for development, and this is kind of a classic example of this. So we have, and this leads to the issue of failure, we have a situation where in international development, you look at the mobile phone, this enormous, enormous success. In information technology, you got to go back to the radio, that's about 100 years ago, to find another information technology success that scaled down to the village in every village. Right? So this is a 100-year phenomenon at best. Before the radio, I don't know where you go, maybe back to the drum or fire, right? I mean, so we're talking about an extraordinarily rare event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful. Event that the mobile phone has been so very successful.